Welcome. My name is Pamela Hart, and I'm Executive Director here at the Center for Animal Law Studies. And joining me today is Lewis and Clark Law School's clinical professor, Erica Lyman. Erica and I are here today to discuss some exciting news, the recent launch of the Global Law Alliance for Animals and the Environment. The Center for Animal Law Studies and the #1 ranked environmental law program at Lewis and Clark Law School have created the Global Law Alliance as champions for wild animals and wild spaces across the globe. The Global Law Alliance works to protect animals and the environment through the development, implementation, and enforcement of international law. Erica is the director of the Global Animal Law Alliance, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Erica, the Alliance, and our students will accomplish for wild animals and the environment. And with that, welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Pam.
We're so excited that you're able to join us today and join the Center for Animal Law Studies team. But before we delve into talking about the Global Law Alliance, can you share a few thoughts about why wild animals need our help, #1? And #2, share with us some of the key threats that wild animals face today.
Well, thanks, Pam. It's actually, I think, a really timely question. We're in the midst of two crises right now. One is an extinction crisis, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And this, sort of dealing with the consequences of zoonotic diseases that largely derive from wildlife sources. The thing about these two crises is that they share common drivers. So we know that direct exploitation by humans is one shared driver of both of these crises, and then habitat loss and land conversion for agricultural production, which incidentally also harms animals, is the second driver of both of these crises. So there's never sort of been a better time to work at this nexus of animal and environmental law. And this, frankly, is all set against the backdrop of climate change, which is going to, further challenge nature's ability to be resilient. It's going to get harder and harder to recover the consequences to wildlife, given our current behaviors.
So for anyone watching this who doesn't know, can you share with us all a little bit about your background and your experience in international wildlife law?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I have worked in this field for 15 years. I come at it from really two different sort of lenses or perspectives. One, as a clinical professor at Lewis and Clark Law School, and an academic in that sense. I have taught international wildlife law, international environmental law, and for the last 14 years, I've taught our international environmental legal clinic, which is now in this 15th year, the International Animal and Environmental Law Clinic. And I've published in this space, so lots of work sort of thinking academically about international wildlife law. And then I've also, as a clinical professor, been a practicing attorney for the last 15 years. My focus as a practicing attorney has largely been in the area of wildlife protection. I've worked very consistently throughout my career to make sure that wild animals and wild spaces are at the forefront of what I do, sort of alongside some of the work that I've done on climate change, in particular, working in the climate change negotiations in the lead up to the Paris Agreement. So kind of hitting all the drivers as part of my practice, and very excited to continue that.
That's wonderful. Was there anything in particular that sparked your interest in advocating for wildlife?
That's a good question. I would say I was that kid, right, who always had sort of this intrinsic understanding or sense that, wildlife belonged in the wild. And there was always really deep empathy for animals and wildlife, in particular for me as I was growing up and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And then I will say I've been so lucky to have had some really formative travel experiences. I worked really hard to fundraise money to help pay for a trip I took to Australia and New Zealand in high school. It was a marine biology trip, and I remember being absolutely blown away by the Great Barrier Reef. And learning as a part of that trip the challenges that those wild animals and that wild space face, just given sort of human destructive behaviors, and knowing that is something I needed to address, however I did it at that point, I wasn't sure. I think I wanted to be a biologist then. And then I also spent a few months living in Western Samoa in college. And it's a really special place. And I think that's where I sort of decided I wanted to be a lawyer, and that I wanted to do something in the environmental space, broadly speaking, as a lawyer. There's living in that kind of situation, you recognize the fragility of island ecosystems and the wildlife that depends on it. And it truly became crystal clear to me that no matter what, I was going to work on wildlife in some way.
Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that about you. It's really fascinating. And I want to go back to your reference that you've been a practicing attorney and you've been in academia for the last 15 years. Is there anything that comes to mind, one or two things that you are particularly proud of when you think back on the past 15 years and all the work that you've done?
Yeah, I would say, for legal careers, right, there's a lot that you do quietly and behind the scenes. And a lot of that I'm really proud of. I get involved on technical issues and implementation issues in international spaces that a lot of folks don't pay attention to or don't have time to deal with, or the expertise to deal with in a very detail-oriented way. And that's something that contribution generally to the international wildlife space I'm really proud of. And then as far as like a very specific incident, I would say it's probably the work that several students and I did on, we wrote a brief basically laying out that Japan was in non-compliance with CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, due to its landing, so its introduction from the sea in CITES terminology, of sei whale meat and blubber that it intended to distribute commercially throughout Japan. So just stepping back context-wise, advocates and campaigners and lawyers, all sorts of folks have been working on the issue of Japanese whaling, for a very long time, and often to little avail in terms of real life consequences for whales. What we did working with a coalition of organizations was really think through this very particular and concrete legal issue. The students and I wrote a brief that really shaped how the CITES parties were able to come to the conclusion that Japan was in fact in non-compliance with the treaty. And the consequence of that, over time and with a couple other sort of intervening actions, was that Japan has retreated from its high seas whaling program, and that's saved hundreds of whales annually. So there's no way I can't be proud of being involved in that.
That's really amazing, and I think it's particularly special that the students had that experience too, and that brings us to our launch, and it's a good segue for us to talk about the Global Law Alliance and your work with the students, and how will the Global Law Alliance be a champion for wild animals and wild spaces?
Thanks, Pam. I'm really excited about this new endeavor. What the Global Law Alliance on Animals for Animals and the Environment is going to bring to the table is really strategic, smart lawyering for the benefit of wildlife. And what that means for us in terms of the work that we bring to the clinic and the work that is public facing in terms of the Alliance, it's going to be deploying legal tools that exist in international fora deploying domestic legal tools that link to international obligations where we can, for the benefit of wild animals and wild spaces. We, always work from this perspective of needing to address the extinction crisis. And so a lot of the work that we do endeavors to protect both animals and species from direct human exploitation. And then we also have quite a large program of work that's really focused on anti-wildlife trafficking efforts, where we work within coalitions of other non-governmental organizations who are working in this space, where we work directly with governments who are interested in capacity building efforts and international institutions and other organizations that support these efforts. So the things that we do are analyze legislation, look at it from the perspective of best practices, advise on legislative or regulatory amendments, or new developments. We engage in comprehensive trainings for enforcement officers, prosecutors, judges, and ministry officials, all folks who play direct roles in combating wildlife crime. And we're really proud of this particular work, where we're building capacity around the world to implement, right, the sort of other side of our work, where we are developing and making law for the benefit of animals.
I love that. And I love that one of the things that makes this collaboration unique is the partnership between the Center for Animal Law Studies and the Environmental Law Program. Something else that makes the Alliance very unique is that it's home to 2 clinics. Could you share with us a little bit about these 2 international clinics for wildlife and how they differ from one another and the type of work that the students will be focusing on?
Sure. So we have 2 clinics that we house, and for which I'll serve as the clinical professor. The one clinic that's focused on JD students is our International Animal and Environmental Law Clinic. And then we have the second clinic, and this is really directed toward our International Animal Law LLM students who are already practicing attorneys. So pedagogically, it's important to teach the practice of law differently, I think, in those 2 clinic spaces. But across both clinics, what we are going to be doing is, students will be supporting the practice of the Global Law Alliance. And that means that they are sitting, in first chair positions on a lot of the work that we do. They're doing the research, they're doing the writing, they have opportunities to participate in international engagement, whether these days it's Zoom meetings or calls with stakeholders, and other sort of coalition members on particular issues. And hopefully, as we move out of the current situation, students have opportunities to travel and attend international meetings with the Global Law Alliance to sort of see that international law making happen in real time, which is a pretty incredible experience. And I think the thing is about these clinics, you'd be hard pressed to find these opportunities at any other law school. There are sort of other international clinics, but not sort of clinics that have the kind of docket that we do, where we are really working on the front lines of some of these issues. So I find that to be really special, and it's something that I love to share with students who are passionate about these issues. So, we have students who don't necessarily go on to practice in this area, but who have an opportunity to sate some curiosity, to learn more about international lawmaking, to work on behalf of animals or habitat environmental issues when they might not for their careers, but it's really important to dedicate some time or interest to that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one thing that I really love about these clinics, and when you were talking about the advanced degree in animal law, in particular for people who are already students, come from all over the world, and they join our animal law LLM program, and they're able to now learn from you and your expertise with the Alliance, and then go back to their home countries and regions and really implement what they've learned and be the cutting edge animal advocates in their home countries. I find it so exciting that we're able to provide that additional support so they can succeed. And once they do graduate, we continue to provide these resources. So it really is a comprehensive way to do outreach about animal law and animal protection all around the globe. I have one final question for you. As you consider all of the threats that wild animals are facing, what do you think are the top 3 things that the average person, someone who's watching this, can do to stop the exploitation of wild animals?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to think about this question pretty broadly, because I think that there's some internalizing of the consequences of a lot of our actions that needs to happen. And so one thing I would recommend is just evaluate your consumption habits. And I think that what a lot of people don't realize is sort of the scale of wildlife consumption and global wildlife trade. We use wildlife products in decor, cosmetics, furniture. I mean, just a huge range of different things that incidentally, without even knowing it, you might be consumers of wildlife. Fashion is a big one. So certain types of materials and clothes that we regularly consume can have pretty significant impacts on wildlife and wild animals. I would say the other thing is really if you're passionate about wild animals, one thing to be more cognizant of probably is your consumption of forest products. And maybe that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but really wild animals need wild space. They very much depend on their habitat, obviously, and in particular, it's in the forested regions of the world where we see the most challenges in terms of consumption of different timber species. You see dire consequences in orangutan habitat where we're converting land to palm oil plantations. So really thinking broadly about your consumptive behaviors and the impacts that they can have on wildlife. And then the third thing I want to flag for folks, then I imagine that a lot of people are conscientious and aware of this, but it's really, being really careful sort of how you engage with social media from the perspective of, what you like and how multiple likes can amplify behaviors and endorse behaviors that are sometimes negative for wild animals, such as, taking pictures at tiger farms, engaging in tourism that, is exploitive of animals and posting those photos in social media, liking celebrity pictures with exotic pets, just all of those kinds of things. This like culture has an impact in the real world, and a lot of times wild animals are the cost of it.
Thank you. That's wonderful insight, and we so appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about the Global Law Alliance. Again, we're so excited about the launch and to have you and your team as part of our team, and really looking forward to seeing everything that you all do on behalf of wild animals in wild spaces. And for anyone out there who is watching this, if you're interested in learning more about the Global Law Alliance or ways in which you can support us, please visit us at theglobalLawAlliance.org. And with that, thank you, Erica, and thank you all for watching us, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you.